Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Total Saints podcast. I'm Jono Holmes and this is our weekly get-together with some Saints experts to discuss all things Southampton Football Club. As always, we are streaming our podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Twitch. So if you're watching live on Sunday evening, you can leave your comments for the panel as we go. So coming up on this week's pod, we will be discussing that defeat to Aston Villa on Friday night. We'll talk international call-ups, Moussa Djenepo's new contract, and we'll be looking ahead to our next game, which is at home to Everton after the international break. Our panel this week includes Steve Grant, as ever, who's the owner of SaintsWeb, and Alfie House, who's the Saints reporter for the Southern Daily Echo. Glen is still off on holiday, I think, so no doubt he'll come back soon looking bronzed. Before we start this week, we also want to shout out a few loyal patrons and long-term listeners of the show. A huge congratulations to Dan and Tori Atkins, who brought a new Saint into the world on Tuesday. £7 and 7 ounces, Theo Atkins. And that massive message is passed on to us from Mark, who's a loyal listener to the Total Saints podcast. So from all of us here at TSP, a massive congratulations to you guys. Great news. Okay, underpinned by our TSP patrons, this is episode 207 of the Total Saints podcast. Well, I don't know about you, but I've definitely had better Friday nights. That's one way of putting it, I think, in what is being described by some as potentially one of the worst games of football in Premier League history. Saints sunk to a 1-0 defeat away at Aston Villa on Friday night. Both teams contributed to a pretty awful game where shots on target were few and far between. In fact, it was just one shot on target for Saints. And maybe one of you guys will remind me on what that was in a second, because I can't even remember it. It's now 3 defeats in 4 for Saints. And we're currently sitting 14th heading into the international break with 7 points from 7 games. Steve, first of all, I'll start with you. Have you had a good couple of weeks? And more importantly, have you woken up yet?
Yeah, I mean, it's been okay. I mean, last weekend was frustratingly curtailed, wasn't it, with the news about the Queen, and so yeah, we all had a surprise weekend off, which was it kind of felt like football kind of got the wrong mood of the country, really. Every other sport played and kind of paid its respects in their own way, and football decided, we're not gonna bother, despite the practicalities of the fixture carnage that we've got this season. Nope, we'll shut everything down and try and basically kick the can down the road for later in the season, which I'm looking forward to Jurgen Klopp's complaints when Liverpool are having to play 4 times in a week in April. That'll be fun. But yeah, I mean, it's been a frustrating couple of weeks, hasn't it? Because after getting into a position where we thought, okay, we've kind of got our system nailed now. We look like we know what we're doing. Got that excellent win against Chelsea, and since then it's kind of ground to a bit of a halt. We were all right against Wolves, I thought. Deserved something out of the game, really. But I mean, to be honest, if some Premier League adjudicator had come in at full time at Villa Park on Friday night and said, no, both of you are getting no points for this, I don't think anybody could have justifiably complained. It was just dreadful. And both teams contributed to it by being just useless. Could hardly string 3 or 4 passes together at any given moment. Real lack of energy from both teams, really. I mean, Villa looked a little bit more lively in spells. But apart from like the first 5-10 minutes of the game and probably the last 5 minutes, we never really looked like we had any impetus at all, and it was very disappointing against a team that, let's be honest, they were there for the taking. They're not very good. Their manager's been under pressure for a while because they spent all this money and they're still not very good. And Villa fans as a sort of collective have a very high opinion of themselves, even though the vast majority of their fan base weren't alive when they won the European Cup. They don't half like to remind people about the fact that they did so. So they've got sort of ideas way above their station, and Friday night should have been an opportunity for us to really kind of get under their skins. If we could have got a goal early on, then they'd have absolutely turned on them. And yeah, it just feels like a huge missed opportunity, really.
Glenn, that was a quick flight back.
I'm fucking knackered, mate. I was awake for something like 36 hours because I can't sleep on flights because I'm 6'2". I just don't fit on planes. And various family members just fell asleep on me. So I know. And then we get back to Gatwick. It's all delayed, of course, a couple of hours. And get back to Gatwick. And, of course, then I've got to drive home from there. So I've fallen asleep a couple of times today. I think I've slept about 3 hours in about the last 3 days. It feels like I'm absolutely bollocksed. So yeah, it could be interesting today.
Don't watch the highlights. They could send you off quite easily from Friday night.
I managed to watch the game. Yeah, I might say this out loud on the podcast. Oh, Jesus Christ!
You are saying out loud on the podcast.
Yeah, maybe. We were staying near a town called Georgiopolis on Crete, right? And there was a sports bar there, so we went in there, and they don't show Premier League games. Didn't know this till we got there, because they got to pay for it. So they just show the German stuff, which is free to air. So we turned around and drove back to the villa. So I thought I'll just watch it on a stream or whatever. I managed to prang the car on the way back.
No.
Luckily, for the first time ever, I'd taken out the full insurance with no. So, Jesus Christ, that was fortunate. So I got back and watched it. I only missed the first sort of 10 minutes. And so having pranged the car, so I felt a bit of a dick and I was in a bad mood for having done that. And then and then sitting and watching that, which was just a appallingly shit game of football. Yeah. But yeah. So
yep.
Yeah, so no harm done on the car front. But...
That's good. Alfie, what about you? How's your couple of weeks been? You were at the game the other night too, weren't you? Was the best bit the journey home? What was it?
No, but actually, I shouldn't really get into it. But the journey home was a nightmare. I didn't realise that part of the M6 closes at that time of night after a football match. So I ended up driving halfway around Birmingham trying to get home. But I wanted to touch on something that Steve actually said. He said that it looked like Southampton were further along the process. You know, they looked like they had a shape that worked. It looked like it was a long ball shape, but it was working. It was, and then the first thing that Ralph said after the game was, "We have, I thought we were further along. We have a lot of work to do." So I think the Wolves' performance, although it was the same result, very similar game, not quite as bad, that didn't disappoint Ralph. Ralph thought that they deserved to get a point or even 3 out of that game, but he was, visibly shocked when he came into the press conference room after the match at Villa, and he said before the game. We want to show a different face. We all know what happened last year in March at Villa Park and what then happened after that. And he said we wanted to show a different face, but didn't. They showed exactly the same face again. And I think that was why people were really frustrated. But, I tweeted it yesterday. AFC Bournemouth have had a better start on numbers now. I don't think they'll be there by the end, but they have got 8 points to 7. And I think that you can't argue that Friday evening was the worst performance of the season so far.
I thought it was on Ralph on Friday. That starting lineup was shocking on paper, and it was even worse on the pitch. It just unbelievable. Those 3 players behind Shea Adams, all selected basically because they can do stuff off the ball. You can't play one up front if you've got no one who can progress the ball. It's just shocking. It's just absolute shit from first to last. I think Steve tweeted that at the end.
Yeah, from 1 to 11, it was just awful, wasn't it? There was no cohesion, no energy about us. I think Carl Walker-Peters said afterwards that it wasn't anywhere near up to the level. It's just I just don't really understand how we've suddenly become a team that just disintegrates when we don't have an 18-year-old who's played 4 senior games in our team. That's quite startling.
Well, I think there's definitely a case of. Ward-Prowse was crap, but he's always crap when he plays next to Diallo. Always, because it's almost like he doesn't trust him, so he can't do his own job properly. And it's just.
I know it's kind of heresy, but has he been any good all season? I can't think of him having a sort of genuinely good game. Certainly not at anywhere near the sort of level that that he was last season. That's for sure.
Well, I was gonna say, Glen, 9 of the starting 11 for the Villa game were at the club last season. So we've got 10 summer signings. Only 2 started the game. Why are we so loyal to the old guard? I don't get it.
No, I don't get it either. For all the good players that we've signed over the transfer window, and we've now, I've seen things like we've won the transfer window, we've signed all these new players, but the 3 players we ended up playing behind Che Adams were 3 players who were poor last year. And they were all selected because of what they can do off the ball, and it was just awful. And the comments he made about Maitland-Niles after the game as well, saying, "Oh, he's good on the ball, but he's not so good off it." Well, hang on, football's not about what you can do with the ball as well. Not just about defending. That's just atrocious. I just thought that was an atrocious comment he made about Maitland-Niles, and it was just a lack of bravery. We go on about, he goes on about bravery. There was none in that team selection. And, I saw people having a go at Che Adams, saying that, he was poor, and he undoubtedly was. But we could have signed Haaland or Lewandowski and stuck him up front. It wouldn't have made the slightest difference. You can't. It's virtually impossible to do anything with the lack of service, lack of support runners, lack of anything. As soon as I knew Ashley Young was playing, I was thinking, yeah, get a dozy against him. First minute, he'll get himself sent off. And you saw what would happen when a dozy come on, 80th minute, run past him once, hacked him down, yellow card. If we were brave, we'd have played a dozy from the start. But we weren't. We were pathetic. It was just awful. Couldn't stand it, really. It was just an awful game to watch. And it was a massive step backwards. I thought the Wolves' performance, it was slightly unlucky. But this wasn't unlucky. Villa were dreadful. Villa were absolutely appalling from the start. They wouldn't have beaten any other team in the Premier League with that performance. But they beat us because we didn't go for it. We were just shocking from the start. Allowed them to grow into the game, and that's why they won. They got the goal. They managed to hang on to it. And as I said before, I thought it was totally down to Ralph and the message he sent out. We've played now Villa and Wolves, 2 teams with 0. I don't think either of them had won, or they've been shocking generally, and we've handed them 3 points by being timid and the complete opposite of the bravery that we're supposed to be showing these days.
What were your thoughts on the team selection, Alfie?
Yeah, I think by and large, I agree with Glen. I think I wasn't actually surprised to see that Adam Armstrong retained his starting place. I think it would have been a big ask to chuck a dozy in straight away. But certainly, El Yunusi has now started 7 consecutive matches, if you include the EFL Cup game. I think, like Glen said, Ralph sees a lot of what he does off the ball. But in a game like that, where Villa, they've won 1 game before that, I think it was sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago, you feel that someone else could have been there. Joe Aribo on the bench. I know that Ralph likes the idea of him as a finisher, but you can't help but feel that he could have done slightly more. And I think, to be fair, the rest of the team, did pick it itself. I don't think there's too much could have done. It's a shame that Ainsley Maitland-Niles is deemed not ready or whatever it is. For me, that was a clear message from Ralph, because there are players on that bench. Juan Larios is 18 years old. They have Ralph said we have a lot of work to do with Ainsley. They have a lot of work to do with Juan, but he's still on the bench. He still comes on for 45 minutes. So for me, Ainsley is purely trying to send a message to him, and it's perhaps reminiscent of some of the things we've heard about him from Arsenal. But I agree again. Why not just have him on there? How poor is he going to be, even if he's not ready, even if he's not tuned in tactically, even if he's not even trying that hard in training, which obviously we don't know is the case, but he still was a good option, and potentially a better option. Having to bring Ibrahima Diallo off after 45 minutes and put Joe Aribo on in the middle of the park playing a defensive role, completely negating his ability going forward as a result of one 18-year-old being injured, it does show that there's a massive lack of depth there. But yeah, I feel 1 or 2 positions could have been different, but by and large, the team does pick itself.
Super Saint Christoph, thank you for your comments. There's shades of Puao in that performance the other night. Just the mention of that name makes me wince. But Steve, I want to come to you on this because we've got a young side. We know that. So performances are inevitably sometimes going to be really good, like against Chelsea, and sometimes not going to be as good. But we're not expecting it to be quite as bad as the other night. I mean, that was pretty shocking, wasn't it? Do you think they were overreacting, maybe?
Yes and no. I mean, long term, I'm really concerned about one individual result and performance. As long as things get taken into context. But I mean, let's also kind of look at that side on Friday night. It wasn't that young. Diallo's been around a couple of years now. Obviously, Prowse is in his late 20s now. Aribo coming on is 26, 27, I think. Djenepo's been around a while now. Shay Adams is likewise. So it's not an inexperienced team that we actually put out there on Friday night. Certainly, some of the lineups we had earlier in the season when other players were available and we were doing things slightly differently. Then yeah, sure, that was a kind of acceptable sort of context that you apply to the team. Say, well, they're learning; it's going to be inconsistent, and I've got no problem with kind of young players are going naturally they're going to be inconsistent because they're not developed, they're not necessarily used to playing at this sort of pace 2 or 3 times a week. But eventually you've got to kind of look at the experienced players and say, well, okay, come on, lads, this is where you've got to lend a hand and provide a bit of leadership to these guys. And there doesn't appear to be a huge amount of leadership in that team right this minute.
Salisu and Bella-Kotchap were the only two who you saw trying to actually coax a performance out of the rest of the guys, and they're 2 of the youngest. So
is that a positive, Glenn? Do you think the defence is looking better? If that's one thing to take from it,
there were very few positives from that game. Larios's debut, and you can look at the Wolves and the Villa games and say, yeah, okay, we look better defensively. And Ralph's got to trust this back four. He has to. But I mean, the caveat to that is both Wolves and Villa didn't offer much going forward, particularly. But you can only defend against what's in front of you. And I thought we, as a back four, we've defended okay in these 2 games. You could argue that that's because Ralph has then put 5 other defensive players in front of them. But he's got to trust that back four and use it as a basis to, and pick 3 or 4 players who are actually decent on the ball, and then we might actually have some attacking play. He just seems to have gone totally into his shell. But yeah, I thought the defence, as a rule, they stood up pretty well. There was a couple of hairy moments, as there always are going to be. But I thought Perot did all right until he was on the wrong end of that tackle from. Is it Bailey? Was it who?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there was a few tackles in there that the one Jacob Ramsey got booked for when he just hacked down Djenepo. That's the sort of challenge that I think should be a red card, because it's all very well doing a tactical foul, just pulling someone back, but if you absolutely wipe someone out with no attempt to go for the ball whatsoever, that's the sort of tackle I'd have no problem with it being a red card. But it never is. It's just a yellow. So, but anyway, yeah. Back to the positives. I think the defence was okay, and they've got to stick with that going forward.
Yeah, it's still though. Actually, Saints have conceded 18 away games in a row, and it's now 13 league games without a clean sheet. I mean, while we say the defence looks a little bit more solid, Alfie, that stat is going to have to change because, well, we don't look like we're going to score many goals at the moment, do we?
No, but I think, to be fair, they have limited the opposition to chances in the past few games. I think only Wolves must have had 1 or 2 chances at most. They kept Chelsea at bay after the first 20 minutes of the game. United didn't exactly have many shots on goal. So I think while they've not kept a clean sheet, they're not actually that far away from it. It was just, the goal on Friday evening was, in the ground, you don't see it too clearly, but I think some people said that Bazunu should have pushed the ball onto the bar or over the bar rather than back into play. It's quite difficult to tell. But I agree with Glenn. I'm not worried about the defence at all. I think although Carl Walker-Peters probably had a bit of a torrid evening at Villa Park on Friday, the player that you always rely on, the player that you need to rely on, he got bullied. But John McGinn, how did he not get booked for that? That 90 minutes. I mean, there was a couple of occasions where I thought he should have had a yellow. But you have to give Villa that they came out wanting to rumble them. They came out wanting to win the physical battle, and they did.
Yeah. The starting lineup, Steve, saw Moussa Djenepo starting in a more advanced role as well, compared to where he's been master play so far this season. And this is, of course, after he signed a new 3-year contract earlier in the week. Do you think, well, first of all, were you surprised at that? And do you think it's deserved, that contract?
I mean, I guess the news was a relative surprise, but given that he's been involved in every game this season, I guess I'm not hugely surprised they've offered him a new deal. I mean, you could kind of see in those early games when he was playing at either fullback or wing back that okay, he looked as if he'd adjusted to that position, and he was positionally disciplined and did okay. And I think if he's your option as kind of a backup in kind of all three of those potential roles down the left-hand side, then okay, yeah, fine. You need players who are good in the dressing room, popular with everybody else, as he, by the sound of it, is, and is willing to is versatile enough and good enough every so often to slot into those roles where you have holes. Because there's kind of no point having, I think, slightly better players for a defined role who is constantly sitting on the bench and is then getting arsey and causing problems. So it's a difficult balancing act. But I think, I mean, as I say, while the news this week was kind of out of the blue, given that he was into his last year, I'm not hugely surprised that he was offered the deal.
Glenn, you've been his, well, fair to say, a critic at times. What were your thoughts on that?
If I may give the opposite point of view, I don't know why they've given him a contract. Really don't. When everyone's fit, he's basically our fourth choice right back, fourth choice left back, and he's had 2 good games on the wing in 3 years that we've had him. I said earlier on in the season that his performances at left back, to my mind, had earned him the opportunity to play further up the pitch to see what he could do. And so I don't really have a problem with him having the odd game, further forward, because as I said all season, the number 10s have never really done it. But he needs to have 3 or 4 games, decent games further forward before you offer him a contract, in my opinion. I just have a feeling this is going to be one that we're going to be looking at in a couple of years' time, thinking the guy's played 4 games or whatever in 2 years. And bearing in mind, he only played three games, was it, last year? And he's had a couple of good games at left back where, unless there's an injury crisis, he's never going to play, even now. And I just don't get it. It strikes me a bit like the Alex McCarthy one last year, where he had a couple of decent games and we went, right, okay, we're going to tie down this player who no one else is going to poach off us. I don't get it. I'd have left him hanging till Christmas.
Well, I hope he's not on McCarthy's contract, at least.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing. I mean, how much money he's on. If he was on stupid money, then you definitely say, what on earth is going on here? But it depends sort of like how much they've committed towards it. But I mean, we don't know the details. Maybe Alfie does. I don't know. But
Well,
I would not have given him a new contract at this point. I'd have waited at least 5 or 6 weeks until he's had, wait till the World Cup and see how he's got on in his performances on the wing until then.
Well, let's ask Alfie. Were you in the media surprised? And also, don't tell Glenn that Elyounoussy's next, because that could finish him off, I think.
Yeah, that's still waiting. I was surprised that it was 3 years, I think, because there's a lengthy contract and it's a big commitment. But I'm actually sort of more leaning towards Steve's stance. I think, in a football squad with 20, 21 players, you need some players who are happy not playing all the time, even if that's 10 games a season. I think he played 12 times in the Premier League last season. Most of those were from the bench. He's not one of Southampton's highest earning players. He's somebody who is happy to play a number of roles and who is happy to sit on the bench when he needs to. And like Steve alluded to, he's really good with the group. Everyone likes him. So, yeah, no, I was surprised that it's 3 years, but I'm not surprised they've given him a new deal. And Ralph likes him a lot as well, as we can see.
Yeah. Okay. We've touched on Ralph a little bit. I'd like to, talk about the manager, because it never feels like we're far away from talking about his situation again, with the rumblings around after a defeat. Steve, he's got a lot of exciting young players. He's been given all the tools now by Sports Republic as well. And, at some point, with the owners putting their money where their mouth is, they're going to expect better performances than that, aren't they? Do you think he's still under pressure, or do you think he was never not under pressure?
I think it's a bit of a cliche, but I think you're always under pressure in the spotlight and glare of the Premier League. But I think realistically, back end of last season, you would have thought was probably other than after that Leicester 9-0. I think back end of last season was probably the hardest pressure he's come under, and yet the club backed him. And they backed him very visibly by binning off the coaching staff, giving him new tools to work with, and not asking him to pick a player to sell before signing some new blood. So I think the club clearly like the cut of his jib, but as you say, having given him these shiny new baubles to play with, eventually they're going to want to see some tangible results. Ultimately, you also have to factor in that. As we've discussed, that by very nature, you're signing all these young players. They're going to be inconsistent, and they're going to need a little bit of time. So I think ultimately, as long as we're not in any sort of dire relegation battle come the second half of the season, I think he absolutely gets all season to see what he can do with these players, because we've already seen on an individual level that pretty much all of these players, you can imagine in 12 to 18 months' time, if they all continue the rate of progression that we've already seen in little fits and starts, that's got the potential to be one hell of a side. So I think they'll give Ralph enough rope, essentially. If he can't make anything out of this group of players that he's been given, then come next summer, it might be time for a change. But I think they will take a long term, well, at least medium term view of it, and give him the whole season, and probably not put a whole load of pressure on him in the background. I wouldn't have thought.
Are you in agreement with that, Glenn? You see that how it is?
Yeah, more or less. It just, you get games like the Villa game where he just frustrates the hell out of me. It was the lack of bravery shown to go out and try and win these games against poor teams. And to me, I tend to go on an individual game-by-game basis, which is not the way you should do it. Obviously, you're supposed to look at the bigger picture. But because of what happened at the tail end of last year, I find myself more and more now looking at individual games and thinking, how did Ralph do in this game, and how did he do in that game? And I just want him to do better for the amount of money that we pay him. And he is one of the highest paid managers in the Premier League. I kind of want him to do better. I want us to look like we're working towards something. And there just seems to be this muddled thinking that creeps in every so often. It's like he's haunted by the ghost of Villa Park Pass, so let's pick 10 defenders. Mm-hmm. And it was just so bad. And it was one of those games where I just felt sorry for everyone who went to it, and to a lesser extent, people like me who watched it elsewhere. It was just awful.
Well, at least surely you had a pint of mythos in your hand.
I had a pint of ouzo.
You need something stronger after that, don't you?
Got it coming out my nose. But so he needs to step up more. It's all very well saying players need to step up, but he needs to step up. I mean, the decision over Maitland-Niles just didn't make sense to me. Who could have predicted that Diallo would have been rubbish? I mean, it's just like, so we end up burning Aribo as an attacking option. Lots of things that I just do. Surely Maitland-Niles was worth a place on the bench. Even if he'd come on for 20 minutes.
Apparently Theo Walcott was worth a place on the bench.
Yeah, I know. That is weird. Competition winner.
Hey, look, at least we're not Leicester. Glenn, I'm sure you're feeling really sorry for Brendan Rodgers at the moment.
Yeah, it's one of those things that eats me up. I was at the airport last night, and there was actually a Leicester fan watching it on his iPad, and I was stood behind him, thinking, this guy's on the same delayed flight as me. I'm really not gonna start laughing or rub it in. It's like fourth goal goes in, fifth goal goes in. Very amusing for Brendan, obviously, and he's just waiting till the day he gets sacked and gets his payout, isn't he? Let's face it, and he'll be looking for another club to rehabilitate his career, much like he did when he went to Celtic.
Alfie, I just wanted to speak to you about the international call-ups, because obviously the players go off now on international duty. Some headlines from the selections in the week. Ward-Prowse is in the England squad. Kyle Walker-Peters missed out. We had Sam Adozie getting a call-up to the England under-20 squad as well. And the one I wanted to get your thoughts on, Armel Bella-Kotchap's first call-up to the Germany senior squad. I mean, we knew he was good. This just proves it, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think, I saw somebody tweet something which I found quite interesting, which was, if he had been playing this well when he was English, would Gareth Southgate have him anywhere near the England team? I think, almost certainly not. He'd have to do it for a much longer period of time. So it makes me wonder the depth of Germany's options. But he's somebody who's obviously played really well for Germany's under-21 setup. They know him very well. And Hansi Flick revealed that Danny Roll came to Southampton, came back here to watch Armel at some point. We don't know when that happened, but he was on site. And he obviously... I imagine he had a good conversation with Ralph, and I imagine Ralph sang all of his praises, and he gets that chance, and it can only be a good thing, can't it? It'd be interesting to see if he plays against England. Is that in Munich or is that in London? In a couple
that's Wembley next Monday.
Wembley,
if he gets a chance there, it'd be interesting to see how he does. Something completely unrelated, I just wanted to talk about actually, because Steve, you mentioned coaches a minute ago, and I was just thinking, we've had 3 set-piece coaches in the last year. So you've had Dave Watson, Alex Clapham came in, but he left after 3 or 4 Premier League games, and then Ruben Selles now leads on the set pieces, but all of them have decided that Mohamed Salisu is the best man for the long throwing job. And I'm not passing a judgment on that, but I find it interesting that all 3 coaches have decided that's the plan.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? I can't make head nor tail of it. I mean, to be fair, I mean when he has these games,
work,
it has worked occasionally.
And statistically, they win the second balls, but Ward-Prowse goal versus Spurs, Adams at Leicester, it does work. But it's when you see him chuck it straight out of play in the end of the game at Villa Park, it just makes you think could have done so much more.
I thought that was an interesting variation. It keeps the other team guessing. 92nd minute, just lob it straight out of play.
Why waste time trying to win the second ball that we'll only give away to cut out the middleman, just throw it straight out.
I mean, it is embarrassing when he has to call players closer, isn't it? Because he can barely reach the penalty area with it. It is embarrassing when he has to do that. And I mean, he threw that one out of play. Didn't he throw one at Djenepo that bobbled straight off his shins? And it was,
shambolic.
Yeah,
and another great moment from Monday night. Friday night.
I think part of it is, I mean, it's not just the whole, we're going to take a long throw because we think it's dangerous. Part of it is also basically eating up time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we want to, I mean, obviously Friday is a terrible example because we showed no intensity whatsoever. But the idea is that we want to be operating at full intensity for as many periods of the game as possible. So actually taking time out of the game when you can, and giving players those few extra seconds of rest is theoretically a good idea. Yeah. So you waste 25, 30 seconds for Salisu to trot up from centre-back to take a throw-in. All of a sudden, those midfield players have got a little bit more energy, and theoretically, they're good to go for another sort of little spell of intensity. But, I mean, it kind of only works when you are intense, and we absolutely were not that on Friday.
No, I think for the segue back to the internationals, I think Mohamed Salisu has been called up to the Ghana squad, hasn't he? Could potentially make his debut, so I'll be keenly watching to see if he's on the set pieces for them as well. But you also mentioned, Jono, there's a Don Ballard, the 18-year-old, 17-year-old.
Sorry, I missed him out.
As well. Obviously a brilliant player. Scored against Leeds on Friday evening against Liam Cooper, Luke Ayling. Yeah, credit to him.
Well, Leeds put out basically a senior team, didn't they? In that game?
Yeah, they won 6-2
Bamford
as a
played,
result.
didn't they?
Yeah, scored a hat-trick.
What's the limit for overage players in the over?
It's 4 outfield. Is it 4 outfield, 1 in goal, or is it 5? Well, yeah,
4 or
about
5,
half a team. About half a team.
Yeah.
So,
And we had some more good news today, actually. We did get a win this weekend. Saints ladies in the Championship won 2-1 at Palace. I think you were there, Steve. Am I right in saying?
Yes. Yeah. They were pretty good, I thought. I mean, their game management at the end of either half was largely awful. But I think that's just something that you kind of have to learn as you acclimatise yourself to the sort of higher level, higher standard of opposition you're playing against. But yeah, I think ultimately, if they'd been a little bit more clinical in front of goal, they'd have been 4-0 up inside half an hour, and would have scored another 3 or 4 in the second half on the break once they got back in front. But that was a deserved win in a game. To be honest, they were second favourites for. They were not fancied in this game at all. Palace had 100% record coming into the game, and yet apart from the occasional moment, largely self-inflicted, really, were the only things Palace created. Apart from that, they didn't really lay a glove on us, and it was, as I said, deserved win, and obviously they're first at that level.
Yeah, good stuff. That's what we like, a win this weekend to celebrate going into the international break. Just before we move on and preview Everton, which is in 2 weeks' time. Now the first part of the season is done. We've made it to the first international break. It's an opportunity to kind of take stock and look how the start to the season has been. 7 games in, 7 points, a couple of good wins in there. Glen, are you where you thought we'd be going into the international break, or how do you assess it?
We are points wise. We are roughly where I thought we'd be. However, after the wins against Leicester and Chelsea, which no one was really expecting. I certainly wasn't expecting wins from those 2 games when the fixtures initially came out. To my mind, we've had an opportunity to be up where Brighton are, perhaps. And we should, to my mind, have won one of the games against Wolves and against Villa. So overall, happy enough, I guess. But the last 2 games have been bad, and we can't really sort of get away from that. So hopefully, the international break we'll see some sort of straight thinking, some clear thinking from those who need to think clearly, and it all depends on how we go. If we beat Everton, then suddenly it's looking quite good again. If we don't beat Everton, it's Manchester City straight after that, and then we're on 10 games with 7 points and done lots of clever. Yeah. So I think it is an important sort of fork in the road at the moment, and that Everton game will be a big game for showing what the expectations can be for this season. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder at any point this season thinking we could be one of the teams that goes down. And if we only have 7 points after 10 games, then that is the sort of form that is going to leave you down there. But there are promising things, obviously. But we've got to learn how to deal without Romeo Lavia probably for another couple of games. And we have shown no signs of being able to do that as yet. Those 2 games that we've lost have been the 2 where he's been absent. And it's ridiculous that we've got an 18-year-old in his first season in the Premier League who suddenly looks that important to us. And whoever it is, be it Diallo, Maitland-Niles, Ward-Prowse, they've got to step up. And Ralph has got to, allow them to step up and not think, oh my God, I've lost this 18-year-old. I've got to pack the team with defenders. So could go either way. But overall, on the games we've had, the fixtures we've had, I think 7 points is a reasonable return.
And would you agree with that, Alfie? How would you assess the first 7?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Almost word for word, I'd agree with that. Like you say, it's a surprise that losing one midfielder has changed the team so dramatically. But I think Chelsea was a really, really good performance, and I think that you can take a lot of inspiration from that. Wolves wasn't that bad; it could have been slightly different, and Chelham's was a hand away from a point and potentially 3, and then all of a sudden you say it's a lot different. But what I just find amazing is, such is the nature of the Premier League, it's like every single week we're saying, "Oh, this is the big game. This is the marker for where we are, where we're at." And I suppose that's testament to the fact that they're not really stepping up each week. They're making jumps up and then back down again, and the inconsistency of young players and whatnot. But the away form is continues to be not very good. I think they won 3 games on the road last season, and they beat Leicester on the road this season, who it emerges are also not very good. So yeah, Everton's a massive one, but I think that they're doing okay. I'm not massively worried about where this season's going to end up. I think there's a lot of promise in the team. I think the ideas are right. They've started to come out, but I think they've got to just ditch this long ball a little bit and just try and play through the thirds, be a bit more transitional, be a bit more creative. They've got the players to do that, and when they do, I think it'll be good.
And take your chances from a yard out too.
Yeah, exactly. You can always bank on that.
Steve, Everton got their first win against West Ham, so they're going into the international break completely the opposite to us, on a bit of a high. And I actually didn't realise they're quite tough to beat recently as well. Before today's win, it was 4 draws in a row, one of which against Liverpool as well. So they'll be on a bit of a high, won't they?
Yeah, you imagine so, but their away record has been, much like us, has been awful for a considerable period of time now. And as a general rule, they've not got a particularly good record at St Mary's historically. So it's a game that we should be targeting to win. I've said this many times on this podcast. I'm wholly unconvinced by Frank Lampard as a top level manager. But then much as I am by Steven Gerrard, and he's just gone and got a win against us. So that's where we are. Someone's got to step up in 2 weeks' time in that game. Everton have somehow spent a load of money when they spent the whole summer saying, "Oh, we haven't got any money," which was an interesting flex at the end of the transfer window. But again, those players are going to take a little bit of time to gel. So you've got to kind of pick up those sort of small little crumbs of comfort where you can, and I think they're a team that we've got a good opportunity against. Don't know if Pickford's going to be fit for them by the end of the international break. I assume he probably will be, but Begovic has always been a bit of a pain in the arse for us, hasn't he? His various previous clubs, but I think, as I say, they're a team that can be got at, but they've had a relatively kind run of games lately. West Ham looking just really out of sorts at the moment. Obviously, extra games in midweek in the Conference League not helping them. You suspect. Also, a couple of big name signings that they're trying to integrate and not quite getting the balance right at the moment, I suspect. But yeah, I think that, as I say, they should be there for the taking, and I would be surprised if we go into that game as underdogs. I think we are. We're not awful at home. We've been. Certainly this season we've been pretty good in our barring that 15-20 minute spell against Leeds. We've been decent at home so far. So hopefully, pick up on that bit more intensity. Just be a little bit more creative, bit braver, as Glen said a few times this evening. You're not going to get away with being as passive as we were on Friday night in a home game, because the fans will get very quickly get on the players' backs for it, and then all of a sudden the atmosphere turns a little bit toxic, and then you're in a whole different pot of problems.
Glenn, who would you like to see in and who out for this one? You can't pick 11.
Well, if you take the team that started the game against Villa, the number 10s is the issue for me. Hopefully Maitland-Niles in 2 weeks can work out how to play in central midfield in this finely tuned setup that we've got. So that'll be the first one, though I did say that last week. The number 10s, you've got the 3 that played on Friday, and then you've got Edozie, Stuart Armstrong, and Aribo. Now, to me, 2 of those 3 have got to play. Personally, I'd go probably for Stuart Armstrong and Aribo. But look to if it's not working, then you get Edozie on certainly for the last half an hour, not leave it for the last sort of 10 minutes. If we need a goal, either to claw the game back, would it be? It'd probably be too brave to start all three of them. But Everton at home, why not? They're a kind of dull outfit. They're solid, but they're dull. There's nothing. Again, this is the old famous last words things. They're not the sort of team that's going to tear you apart. They've got Mope and Anthony Gordon up front. It's not exactly the world's most threatening attack, but they're a solid team. They got the guy back from Paris, didn't they? Garner Gay. They got him back. Yeah. He's decent. They got another midfielder, Anana, who's another one they signed. Like Steve said, how did they sign him? He was they spent 30 million or something on him for a team that has no money. Cody and Tarkovsky at the back, they're solid, unspectacular but solid. So maybe it is a game to say to a Dozy, go on, run at them from the first minute and see how it goes. But hopefully we lean more towards that than the sort of pragmatism which ultimately didn't work at all from Friday. Well,
it's predictions time. So looking at the table at the moment for the predictions so far this season, Glen is top with 8 points so far from the 7 games. For the Villa game, Martin was the only one to get 3 points. He predicted a 1-0 to Villa. Ben and Jacob got 1 point for the right result there too. Steve only on 1 point at the bottom at the moment, holding everyone up. What's going on, Steve?
Strongest team at the bottom, holding everyone up. That's fine.
Strongest stable.
Yeah. It's just kind of goes to show that we're just absolutely impossible to predict at the moment. We're just, you can't rely on us. I mean, anybody who puts actual money on any of our results week by week, absolute mugs game.
Okay, well, let's go around and get some predictions for Everton in a couple of weeks' time. Then, Alfie, what are you going for here?
I'm tossing up between 2-0 and 2-1 to Southampton. I feel like the clean sheet's got to come at some point, and I'm going to lean into it. I'm going to say 2-0.
Okay, he's going 2-0. What about you, Glenn? Top of the table, Glenn?
No pressure. Similarly to Alfie, defensively, I think we're getting there. I think it will be a horrendous game, and I think we will win it 1-0.
So it won't be as bad, not as bad as Villa, though.
No, it can't be that bad, but in a similar sort of way, we'll play as badly as Villa did and just about sneak it, I'm hoping. So I'll go for 1-0 for us.
What about you, Steve? You need some points.
Yeah, I mean, I was initially going to go 2-0, and then I was going to go 1-0, and both those were taken. 0-0. But no, I'll nail my colours. Original colours to the mast. I'll also go with 2-0. I just think that clean sheet's got to come eventually. Balance of probability, and for once we might just get the bounce of the ball fall for us in front of goal. That'd be nice. Okay,
a couple of 2-0s there. 1-0 for Glen, wasn't it? Yeah, 1-0
yes,
for. So we'll see, guys. Well, that's pretty much it for this week. It was a surprising one, wasn't it? With Glen coming in about 10 minutes into, and more surprises than the game the other night. Anyway, and glad you had a good time, Glen, regardless of the football.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Total Saints podcast on Facebook and Twitter. It's at Total Saints Pod. Our website is totalsaints.co.uk. Includes a link to our online shop as well, Total Saints Icons. You can drop us an email during the week as well if you like, anytime. And we're also on Patreon too, where you can support the podcast with a monthly contribution. Just visit Patreon.com. That's PATREON /total